Let me get started tonight. My name is Tony Yanis. My nickname is Fat. When I ran for city commission, the thing said Tony Fat Yanis, and it was a good thing because otherwise nobody would know what the hell they were talking about. I want to start tonight by sharing something that really struck me, and that is that given the circumstance that we're dealing with today, I just wanted to say that and I know Greek's going to say something wise, but I really love women, not for the obvious reasons, 6 wives, etc. I do, but I have a lot of respect. When I was a city commissioner, every board appointment that I made was a woman. And I didn't know till Becky said, "Did you know?" Blah blah blah, which is really good. I think because you guys don't have testosterone, I think you're easier to work with. Quite frankly, I'd be content laying in a hammock eating fresh fruit and being a sex symbol, whatever that's worth for, or at least a symbol, not if I did anything. But here's the whole thing. When Hitler advanced on Stalingrad in the winter, yes, part of the reason he lost the war was he advanced so far that the Russians just cut off his supply lines in the back. And that was that. But here's an interesting part. What's that? Oh, okay. Well, you look awfully good for 120 years old, Terry. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll tell you a story about Terry in a minute. But anyways, so here's the thing. So Stalin reached out to Russian women and created the Russian machine gun corps. And he had all these thousands of women that were expert machine gunners. And it stipulated that part of the reason that they beat the Germans was, and there was an interview going, the woman's going, "Yeah, I kill all of them, I kill all of them." They were really into it. That was interesting. So let's come to common day today. I always say to all military people and all law enforcement people, thanks for your service. But I want to take it a step further today. As of past few weeks, in the military, there's active military 229,000 active military women, 17.5%. So, you know what? Thank you. Anybody that thinks that women can't do it at their first sex and stuff like that, man, they're tough sons of bitches. They really are. They things come out of them, babies and shit, and they get married and divorced and stuff, and they're really really great. So my hats off to women, and my hats off to women in the military. You got it. You got it. Jess, I didn't know you were in the military. Were you in the St. Lucian National Guard? Oh, you just appreciate the woman thing. Okay, Jasmine is my sister. Jasmine and I started working at Cocoa Beach together 37 years ago, and she's become my sister. So anyways, what I wanted to tell you a little bit, we did this is our 6th show, I believe, and we always did a show a little different. And we did the first 3 shows where people came up and stood up and they told their stories. And of course, you're there in the audience, and then the shark came up and I kicked them and stuck my finger. And you're like, "Ah," and you're living vicariously through them, right? But here's what I noticed. The people telling your story are getting off just because it's either a happy or a sad or a scary time that they're now having other people share with them. And that's why it works. So, full disclosure, we stole this idea from public radio. And of course, in Key West, we decided to call it La Cucaracha Chronicles. But before I go any further, Becky and I have been talking about this for about 10 years, never pulled the trigger. And then my dear, dear friend, Rita Troxel, who's here, wrote a book and did a great show where people were reading and stuff like that. And that was kind of the motivating factor for me to get up my ass and do this. So Rita, thank you very much for I always say she was the one that lit my crack pipe. So we're gonna go ahead and so we've done different formats. We did it when people came up here and people would cry and people would laugh and it was insane. And then we did 2 where we had the fourth wall. And we didn't acknowledge the audience. We were like different things. Tonight I want to kind of go the other way. Tonight I'm happy to have audience participation. So at some time or another, I may ask something or something. Please feel free. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to start off by having somebody that really understood the conditions in Key West, in those days. In 72, the Navy pulled out, and things got really, really tough. And there was a little hole in the wall called the Full Moon Saloon. All the geriatrics are in the house. So a lot, the pulse of what was happening with smuggling, you might say, had a lot to do with the full moon, because the people that owned it had been involved at one time, allegedly, and so I asked Carol to bring me something that would put you there, and then we'll take it from there. My friends, please, Carol Shaughnessy.
At the beginning of this, Pat said he wanted Greek to sit next to him so that he could keep an eye on her. I really think, Greek, you need to keep an eye on Pat. So, I'm going to set the stage. I somehow created this little chat book years and years and years ago. Phases of the Moon. Vic and Sid, who apparently had some extra money and were willing to give it to me. But first, I need to kind of set the stage about Key West in the late 70s and early 80s. When I first came to Key West in the late 70s, I was a naive 20-year-old Minnesota girl in a Salvation Army fur jacket, which of course I got rid of at the earliest opportunity. And I flew down to this exotic place that I had barely heard of to meet my Minnesota boyfriend, who had friends living here, and he said, "Oh, we can spend a couple months there thawing out," because it had been one brutal Minnesota January. Well, unfortunately, my boyfriend, John, he had some business in New York, so we didn't fly together. And I emerged from a, I believe, 9-passenger Air Sunshine plane, which I later learned to call Air Sometimes because of its, let's just say it was a less than perfect arrival record. And I emerged into this third world airport and a vista full of the brightest, whitest sun I had ever seen. And the taxis outside the airport were pink. And just in case that wasn't enough to make me know I was in a whole new world, there were palm trees everywhere. So I gawked out the cab window during the whole drive to John's friend Wally's house where we were supposed to stay. And the pink taxi pulled up to the old wood frame house on Newton Street, still there, and it's still as gorgeous. And I jumped out eagerly and ran up the steps and across the veranda, and I knocked on the door, because after all, John was waiting for me, right? "Hello," I called through the screen. Well, in a minute, I was answered, not by a person, by a cloud of pot smoke about as thick as a Minnesota blizzard. And eventually, through all that smoke, I glimpsed Willie Nelson. Now, it wasn't really Willie Nelson, but it could have been his dark-haired twin. And I don't know if anybody knew the infamous Wally from here, but yeah. And he said, "Hey there." I said, "You must be Wally." And I spoke as brightly as Mary Tyler Moore because she was another Minnesota export, and I was determined I was going to make a good impression, right? "Hi, I'm Carol. I'm John's friend from Minnesota. Is he here yet?" And Wally looked at me, kind of a long, hazed kind of moment. "John," he said. "Oh, yeah, John. How's he doing? I haven't heard from him in 6 months." Well, turned out that John had neglected to tell Wally that we were coming and that we were staying with him. But since it was Key West in the late 70s, 5 minutes later, I had stopped crying, and Wally had decided that any friend of John's was perfectly okay with him, and I could stay in his spare room until John arrived, or I decided what I wanted to do next. It took John 2 years to show up.
Right
Oh,
on
yeah.
time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was definitely on Key West time. But that honestly didn't matter, because after I had been here for 2 days, I realized what I wanted to do next. For the first time in my life, I was home, and next was going to be live the rest of my life on this island. Well, not long after that, I was adopted by some people. Stop laughing, Pat. Adopted by some people who they loved the island. Their passion for the island was bigger than Key West itself. And they were good enough to share their stories with a naive Minnesota girl. And eventually I learned they were making an unspoken bargain with me. And it had nothing to do with smuggling, believe it or not. That bargain was that I would, in whatever small way that I could, I would preserve those stories they told me and become one of the keepers of Key West's flame. And so this is for them. This is more or less an excerpt from this, which I've now gotten my black pants all filled with white stuff. Much has been written about the 1970s and the early 80s in Key West. It's a time, and most of you will remember all of these strange things that happened. One island mayor water skied to Cuba on a single ski just to prove he could. The average civic employee and a really large percentage of the police department, well, they were under indictment or investigation or whatever for some unspecified crime. Smuggling pot was considered more of a hobby than it was a crime. And Key West seceded from the Union and formed the independent Conch Republic. So those were the days when shrimpers ruled the waterfront, right? Fighting for their honor, fighting for the hell of it, fighting for God only knows what, in the dingy downtown bars, and homes that nowadays are perfect. They're pristine, they're pastel, they're gorgeous. They were held together by essentially termite spit or something slightly less politically correct that termites emanated. Yeah. Okay. Duval Street. Okay. It was so quiet for at least half the year. Literally, dogs could sleep on the street and be totally undisturbed. Okay. And at the same time, Key West was a magnet for adventurers of all kinds. And whether they were dabbling in importation of some unspecified substance or stopping here on their way to Afghanistan because they were writing a story for Esquire and they'd heard about this place, or looking for 17th century shipwreck treasure, there was kind of a seductive, almost dangerous appeal, almost hell, a seductive, dangerous appeal about this little island at the end of nowhere, or as a dear friend of mine said, at the beginning of the world. And Phil Caputo, who I'm sure many of you knew, his rumor of war had been hailed, by the time he got here, it had been hailed as the definitive book on the Vietnam conflict. He was a Key West resident during the late 70s and early 80s, and he wrote an incredible description of Key West that he presented to the Key West Literary Seminar. And when I told him I was doing this, he was amazing enough to say that I could use whatever I wanted of his presentation. He described Key West and its most colorful characters with incredible insight, calling these characters the direct spiritual descendants of the pirates, wreckers, and rum runners who had given Key West its outlaw reputation. He said, I suppose it would be improper of me to speak fondly of dope smugglers, but I found myself drawn to these renegades, possibly because, to rephrase something my friend Tomas Sanchez said, there is an element of the renegade in the writer, the contrabandista of the mind and heart. Caputo also described in this same presentation A morning visit by Mel Fisher, who later discovered the treasure of the 1622 shipwreck Nuestra Senora de Atocha. Well, at that point, Mel had not found the Atocha. He needed to borrow a boat, and Caputo had a boat. Well, he couldn't borrow Caputo's boat, so he said, well, hey, can I borrow you? I could really use another crew member. Caputo said, off I went. Only in Key West could a man come to your door at breakfast time and ask you to help him search for the treasures of the Spanish Main. Only in Key West. You've all said it. It's a phrase once used by Hemingway, often used by present-day locals, generally accompanied by that shrug and a grin, and it expresses the inevitability of some course of action that in the real world would be regarded as completely absurd, but in Key West, it's just, hey, part of the daily tapestry of life, right? And only in Key West, in those gritty glory days of the late 70s, could a bar like the Full Moon Saloon spring up and become headquarters for pretty much everything. There are bars in Key West that open and close in a season, no one realizing they've been there at all, right? And there are bars that almost effortlessly make a place for themselves in island history that live on in the collective memory forever. Their characteristics affectionately exaggerated over the years, although someone who heard this said they weren't exaggerated. They were all true. Well, the Full Moon Saloon, which most of you knew very, very well back in the day, that was a bar of the latter sort. It was dark, smoky. It was seedy, but cheerfully seedy, you know? And cold. It was really cold. Really cold. And it could never have succeeded without its two owners, Vic Latham and Sid Snellgrove. They were big men. They had kind of lived-in looking faces. And they handed out generous drinks, careless hospitality that seemed effortless but wasn't, and some of the most vicious quips that probably anyone has ever heard. And they developed the Moon into a haven for the high rollers and the late nighters who reveled in Key West's outlaw atmosphere at that time. And think back, you'll remember. Caputo said, I once called the Moon the favorite watering hole of semi-retired Caribbean renegades. There was an aura of adventure, even an illicit adventure. There was a little bit of an edge there. Yeah, you think? But in those days, one of the most popular forms of adventuring was to sail a cargo of pot up from the islands and into the little bays and inlets of the Florida Keys. This activity was not regarded as a crime. As Caputo said, it was a little bit like running rum on the dark nights from Cuba during Prohibition, which, of course, also had been a common Key West occupation. And Vic Latham, who was once called a Santa Claus gone bad, possibly by Greek, I'm not sure. I'll take credit for it, trust me. But he said a high percentage of the people that got into the smuggling business in this town didn't think of it as illegal. It was playing cops and robbers. It was a period when loyalty meant so much more than legality. And Caputo said, I had the impression that there was a sort of mom and pop operation about this importation of illegal substances. It was wrong, okay? It was a crime, but it had almost a kind of rake hell innocence to it. Beautiful phrase. What did Sid say? Everybody loves a pirate. He was very concise. And it may or may not be true that everybody loves a pirate, but it's absolutely certain that the Keys pirates of the late 70s and early 80s, well, they loved the Full Moon Saloon. And they sometimes used it as a meeting place to conduct their business, but they also adopted it as a place to relax, a place where they didn't have to look over their shoulders all the time, a place where nobody would ask them what they did for a living. Yeah, it's kind of apparent, but, even so. It was almost as though the Keys smugglers, they protected the Moon from the hazards of their profession. And they weren't the only Moon customers seeking somewhere to relax, as Key West gained renown as a refuge where celebrities could successfully hide away. Well, they discovered the Full Moon Saloon. The bar became a favorite haunt of everyone from self-proclaimed gonzo journalist Hunter Thompson, who, and I will tell you, if you did not know Hunter, he really was insane, to legendary poet Jim Harrison, Tomas Sanchez. Harrison had blues too. And Vic said this was an era when you couldn't tell the scammers from the celebrities, nor could they tell each other apart. Smuggling was chi-chi, and the celebrities wanted the smuggler's identity. And in a like manner, the smugglers lusted after the recognition and wanted to be seen with the celebrities. So the Full Moon was kind of an amalgamation of the two. Well, one of Key West's then inhabitants who understood both smugglers and celebrities, of course, was Buffett. And he partied with and wrote songs about the smugglers, and that helped propel him into the ranks of the celebrities. And through it all, he remained a patron of the Moon, and he staged a whole lot of impromptu concerts there. Well, every once in a while, the Moon was invaded, okay? DEA agents. They heard it was a smuggler's haven, and they dreamed of making a big drug bust there. And, you know, that never actually worked. But, hey, they would spend a few days there trying to look like they belonged, which also never worked. Well, it was the shoes. Plus, the first night, they always came in with ties. The shoes were definitely part of it. But, and then by the time they were getting ready to go, then the smugglers would be sending them drinks across the bar. And they'd be drinking them, trust me. Somebody who did belong at the Moon, though, and who helped define its unique character was a guy named Phil Clark. He was a larger-than-life character who had been on the island since the 60s. And he not only drank and socialized at the bar, but it was his office, and that payphone. You didn't want to get in the way of Phil when he needed that phone. He was the inspiration for Buffett's anthem, A Pirate Looks at 40. And he was one of those daring Keys renegades who it always seemed like he was about to evolve into a living legend, right? He had tried just about every hazardous occupation known to man: mercenary soldier, gentleman smuggler, New York City advertising executive. And he actually told me once that it was the last one that gave him the worst twinges of conscience. He drank whiskey at the Moon. He argued politics at the Moon. He got engaged at the Moon, to me, actually. And boy, did we have some arguments at the Moon. But years later, when Phil died in Sausalito under an assumed name, donations from the Moon paid for his cremation and brought his ashes home. And that was the kind of place it was. And I sure as hell hope it was Johnny Walker. Oh, was it? Or else it was Glenlivet, right? Okay. So now the Moon, all of the denizens of Key West's old days, they had to weather some changes as the island kind of grew up and became seemingly overnight, bizarrely enough at that point, a popular vacation destination. What? So the bar moved from the original United Street home over to Simonton Street, and it struggled to become a serious business in a confusingly chic new world. And it hung on, and it even flourished for several years. And then in 1993, with startling suddenness, it closed its doors. Some people said it was tax troubles that led to the Moon's demise. Some blamed the changes in Key West or the federales, who eventually put a lot of its regular clientele behind bars of a different kind. And if you think about it, for more than 30 years now, the Full Moon Saloon hasn't had an address or a tangible existence. But if you ask a veteran Key West resident about it, if anybody asked one of you about it, chances are they'd be rewarded with a reminiscent smile and a whole bunch of stories that would sound as incredibly improbable and had that ring of truth. And today's Key West, well, it might seem a long, long way from the outlaw era that spawned the moon. Shrimpers are gone. The ramshackle houses are gorgeous, renovated, empty, a lot of them. And the island swarms with visitors who have never heard of the Full Moon Saloon. But that doesn't really matter, because in the glossy Duval Street watering holes, cocktails are served by bartenders who learned their craft at the Full Moon Saloon. Some of today's businessmen, well, they're yesterday's scammers, and nobody really wants to know how they got their money. The moon might be long gone, but their eyes still gleam if anybody mentions its name. Beneath Key West's genteel exterior, nothing has changed. That renegade heart still beats, and that's one of the major reasons for the island's enduring appeal, because the essence of that smuggling era that these ladies are going to talk about tonight, that remains alive in all of us who are lucky enough to be part of it.
Thank you, Carol. I don't want to jump in here, but I'll tell you two quick things about the full moon.
That's yours.
Rika, you kind of got to hang on to your mic there, babe. Here you go.
Oh.
Yeah. Make believe it's a kilo of cocaine, and you. I just want to say this real quick about the full moon. You know, she talks about renegades and crazy quips and shit. You know, one time my brother's sitting at the bar and he tells me a story. He comes home and he goes, "I'm sitting there. A guy walks in through the door in camo, full camo with a duffel bag, and you can see it was half open. It was full of $100 bills, and he's got a bullet hole in his side, right?" And the bartender comes up and she goes, "Oh my God, what can I do for you?" That was Michael Dale. And regarding, you know, the quips, Vic Latham. And Vic was what, 6'10"? He was a big guy, you know, the bad Santa. And he used to love to have a saying. We used to do these parties and he used to show up and I'd say, "Vic, blah, blah, blah." And he'd say, "No," he says, "I'm just here to play bass and help with the fucking." That was one of his favorite things was. That's the kind of way it was, and we'll circle back around to it. But I want to kind of do a 180-degree turn, if I may, and I want to introduce to you Bridget, who was a Coastie officer during the heyday of the smuggling days. She was an officer, and she did some time. You don't. You
not during the 70s.
No.
I wasn't even like.
No. But still, you were involved in the other side of the smuggling in the 80s, the 90s, whenever the hell it was, and so, what's that?
No, we talked about this on the first meeting.
Okay.
We'll go back on this.
Okay, so when were you in the Coast Guard?
1997.
Okay, so she was in 1997.
I was the end of their era.
Right, and what did you do in the Coast Guard? So what? So what did you do? What did you do in the Coast Guard?
Back then, I worked at Station Miami Beach. So I joined the Coast Guard after having grown up in the Coast Guard, and went to Station Miami Beach and got to immediately see what everybody remembered, which was Miami Vice and the big fast-running boats and the cool midnight express boats that the Coast Guard had to interdict the smugglers that were coming up.
Okay,
and then add on to the career. 20 years later, I was working in the Pacific or the Atlantic or the Caribbean on big boats doing interdictions of a different type of drug.
But I think what I wanted to kind of establish is that a lot of these people, these ladies are going to talk about what their side did, and I just wanted to intro you to the audience before it got really carried away, so that they too late, Greek. Thank you. No, I don't think it's too late. She was in the goddamn Coast Guard, and you guys were criminals. What the fuck? What the fuck was it so late? There were the cops, and you were the robbers. What the fuck?
There is one thing I will say on this.
Okay.
And I kind of started to allude to it when Pete and I talked, and I said, well, there are odds. And I was in the Coast Guard, and part of my odds was to interdict drugs on vessels that I knew about or was told about or had an intel that there was going to be a movement of drugs somewhere on the ocean.
Right.
And then as I got farther in my career, I ended up briefing and teaching all these other people how to do that. And I was sitting there one day at a briefing, and I took the whole United States map, size-wise, and put it across the ocean. And you could see how much of the United States fit in the ocean, on the Atlantic, over the Caribbean, and in the Pacific, so they could see. And I said, imagine my success is based off of you driving a Honda Civic with something stolen, and I have to figure out how you're going to get there from Florida to California, which highway you're going to take, when you're going to stop, and I am driving a school bus because I am not going to get there as fast as you. And on occasion, every so often, a local police department will be like, I have a helicopter that spotted it. And that is sometimes what the law enforcement success is on our side for interdicting these vessels.
Right.
Now, if you go back to the fishing vessels that you and I talked about from Colombia, back in those days, and even into now, you'll see those fishing vessels sitting out there, but they all look the same. There's not a lot telling them apart except maybe a color. So we have a very hard job. There's a reason why people are very successful with smuggling drugs. I'm not going to say they aren't, and there's a reason why they continue to do it.
Yeah.
But we are doing our best efforts, and we're using all of our authorities and things like that on the high seas to stop the interdiction from coming to the United States, and obviously much worse drugs than pot.
Yeah.
Now, but those are the things where they were successful because it was a lot easier back then because you could get on airplanes and things like that with different things. But vessels are still an easier way to transport. And I don't think anyone will disagree with that.
What percent of do you think that you actually interdict? I mean, 10%, 20%, 30%, 5%?
Statistically, back when I was in the Coast Guard, so this is probably 8 years old of data, it was in between 25 and 40%.
Wow.
But that's what we knew about.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we knew about.
Yeah.
So on a really good week, it might have gone up to 40.
Yeah.
And on a really bad week, it was 0.
Yeah.
But there was tons of other things coming through probably that we didn't know about.
Yeah, a lot of ocean out there.
There's a lot of ocean.
Yeah. Our good friend Abe Kahn was DEA for a while, and he told a story here one time. But they grabbed a van, and they busted the guy with the thing. And when they were interviewing the guy, he said, "Yeah, you know how long it took me to stash all them drugs in the." And they jumped in the car and drove 200 miles or whatever. I know I'm not telling it right, but if at the first blush they didn't know exactly what they had. I think that happened. So again, ready? Criminals, policemen. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
No doubt. We had a question. Full spoon saloon. Come on, let's try something difficult. Yeah, I know where this is gonna go, and it's okay. It's okay. I got a full moon story, but this is not. It's not for me. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask somebody that for me he really had a lot of cojones in some trips, and I'm gonna ask Sweet Pete to tell you about some of the stories. And there was a couple different ways, right, to bring the shit in, right? So the big shrimp boats like I brought in when a long time ago, and the past the statute of limitations, and then planes, obviously planes, and then there was also the one that I think took the biggest amount of courage and balls because you were on the small sailboat for weeks. And you were stopping all these little islands, and then you're on a sailboat, and you're moving 3 knots, and you got 100 pounds of marijuana, and So what'd she say? 2 ton in the sailboat? See, so what do I know?
But it
Well, wait a minute. My brother. Who?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So, see, my brother told me when he gave me my cut that it was 100 pounds. Jesus Christ. Pete, it's your Sweet Pete.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Carol. That brought tears to my eyes. Such great stories. I really appreciate it. And second of all, I want to say that the first time I ever met Michael Dare, I was in the chart room and I said to him, "Oh, hi, my name's Pete. What do you do for a living?" And he said, "I move heavy equipment." Everybody in the bar burst out laughing. And we became fast friends later. But yeah, great guy. Let's see. I'm going to talk about how I got into it the first time. And I went into the chart room once again, and my girlfriend was dating this guy who had a 41-foot Choi Lee sailboat, and he was taking the girls down through the Bahamas and invited me along. So that's how I learned to sail. And about 2 months later, he called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to make some money?" And I said, "Yes." And so he told me that I was going to, get on a small sailboat with a friend of his and go to Belize. And I had no idea what that all meant, who the guy was or anything. But anyway, Ernest picked me up at my house and, he said his name, but it's long ago. Anyway, I don't think he's with us anymore anyway. So he picked me up at my house on Varela Street and drove me to Marathon and to a little marina where I met his friend Grub, who was a very crazy Australian person. And it was just him and I taking this boat 850 miles to Belize to pick up a load of pot and bring it back. I was probably 28 at the time, I want to say, and really, foolish, obviously. But I remember that we hit the boat out under the 7 Mile Bridge, and that's when I started to freak out a little bit. And I know. It was just kind of like you don't know what you're getting into until all of a sudden you're there. So anyway, we sailed for, I don't know, almost a little over a week, I would guess, it took us to get down there. And we went to San Pedro in Belize and anchored up at a dock at a hotel, met some nice people, hung out for a couple of days. And then one night he said, "Let's go." So we went out and we loaded up the boat in the middle of the night with strange people throwing bales at us. And we put them down below. I know. So anyway, we get the boat loaded, and then we're going to head back to good old US of A. And there was a problem with the engine. So we ended up limping back into dock at the hotel in San Pedro. And he had to fly to Belize City to buy a part for the engine. And he told me, "Stay here."
Are you sure? Oh my God, Pete.
He said, "Stay here with the boat, and I'll be back in a couple of days." He said, "Don't let anybody on the boat." And I'm like, obviously. So I ended up making some friends there. We went out to dinner and stuff. One of the guys actually came back to US and worked for Rick at the Bagatelle. But anyway, so I'm down there by myself, 20-some years old, in Central America, don't speak Spanish, don't know anybody. I'm with a crazy Australian who I don't know where he is. There's no cell phones. And every time somebody came by and said, "Hey, can I see your boat?" I'm like, "No, captain said nobody can get on if he's not here." So he finally got back. It was almost a week that I was by myself. And he gets back, fixes the engine. And, I forgot to mention, also when you sail down there, there's no markers or charts or GPS. We had a little RAN, but there's nothing to, aim it at. So anyway, when you get there, I got there in the middle of the night. It was my watch. I'm driving the boat. He's asleep. And all of a sudden I heard the sound of water on rocks. And I said, I think I better wake him up. So I go down. So I went down below and I said, "There's this weird sound out here. It sounds like water on rocks." And he said, "Oh, well, thanks for getting me up." And turns out they don't have any, there's a reef there, but there's no lights. There's nothing. So what you do is you throw an anchor and you wait for somebody to come and get you the next morning and bring you through the thing. So that's what we did. Anyway, so a week later after he got back, we sailed back another week. So I was on this boat for, I don't know, 3 weeks, probably tops. We sailed over 2,000 miles together, me and this guy that I didn't know. And I kind of knew him by the time we got back. But so anyway, when we came back, I said, well, what? Because they never tell like people like us, the second mate or whatever we are, the little helpers. They don't tell us where they're going or who they're going to meet or anything like that. So you're just like, hello, what are we doing today? And so
it's good they don't tell you,
yes.
because then when the federal government arrests you, you can say I didn't know.
I knew nothing.
Right, Abe?
So it's kind of interesting because right now I have a house up in Tarpon Springs, and that's where we ended up dropping our load. So, so we went up to Tarpon Springs. So 2,000 miles later, we got back to Tarpon Springs, and it was so foggy that night that we were supposed to drop that you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see anybody. We're on the radio. They're talking to us. We're talking to them. And all of a sudden I heard a guy's voice like right over here. I can hear him on the radio and I can hear him over here. I go, hey, we're right next to you. And so we met the Greeks, and we dropped our load. And at that point, my captain and I hadn't spoken, I don't know, for a couple of hours. We kind of hated each other at that point. And so after we get the whole load off, he says to me, I'm going to throw the anchor. And I thought about it for a second. I went, hey, wait, you untied it last. I didn't get the words out fast enough. He threw the anchor overboard with nothing tied to it. And we looked at each other and we burst out laughing, and we were like, all right, we're good. So, and I got paid. So it all turned out well. So that's that story.
Would you take? And I know. Sometimes these shows have always run an hour and 40 minutes, and I'm being told that's way too long. So, and Greek hasn't started talking yet. So, but would you real quickly tell us about the time that you ran aground in Boca Grande where all the kids and the picnics and stuff? Tell us about that
Because
story.
my captain kept saying to me, another time where I hated my captain. But I tell you, when it was once again, a small sailboat, and we went all the way to Jamaica this time. So that's another 800 miles, I think. I'm not sure. But yeah.
You get it. You got it. Yeah.
So I'm on another little sailboat with some people that everyone here probably, well, not everyone, people here know. Anyway, we were going to Jamaica to pick up a load, and we went down through the Bahamas, the tongue of the ocean. It was hot. There was no wind. We're on a sailboat. We had like a blue and white check sheet over the boom to keep us in the shade. We looked like the Beverly Hillbillies at sea. And I remember playing a lot of Yahtzee because we had no wind. But another cool thing that happened on that trip was we were down off the east coast of Cuba, and a United States aircraft carrier was doing some things, and they were doing touch and goes. They were doing practices, so they could read my T-shirt that said, remember those old shirts that said "It's the heat"?
Yeah.
So I had a T-shirt on that said "It's the heat," and from like wherever 2 miles away, they were saying, "Hey, how hot is it over there?" So they said, just stay where you are, don't move. We're going to do a show for you right now. So we got to sit there and watch them do their practice, which was really cool. And no, we were on our way down to Jamaica. So when we got to Jamaica, and once again, we had to wait a little while. I don't know why. There was always a wait. But I remember my captain went to get a haircut in Montego Bay, and he had very straight hair. And when he walked out of the shop, I just burst out laughing. He looked like an Amish kid that somebody had put a bowl on his head.
The bowl cut.
And he's like, shut up. So anyway, we loaded up that night, and we were coming back. We had some bad weather, and just like, I think I threw an alarm clock at him. I hit him with an alarm clock in the head. And yeah, and so every time he'd look at that, it stopped working, and he's like, it's 1:15 still. So we got back, we're headed back and almost home. And he kept saying to me, I know Boca Grande like the back of my hand. And like 100 times. I'm like, if you say that one more time, I'm going to throw the clock at you again. But anyway, it was a Saturday night. So we're coming in the dark. And what does he do but run the boat aground? And we've got a full load on. So we're at Boca Grande on Sunday morning when the sun came up. And we're on the radio with the people on shore, and they're like, all right, somebody's coming out. And so they came out with one boat, and they could not get us off. There was a sailboat there. Some poor guy was up in his mast doing some work on his boat, and we have one boat coming out here, and they tried to pull us off, couldn't. So then the second boat came out, and they tied up to us and tried to pull us off. Nope. So they said, we're just going to have to unload right now. Sunday morning at Boca Grande. So this poor guy working at a sailboat, we start throwing bales, and he skinnied down his mast so fast it took off. And I thought for sure, he's going to call somebody. Somebody's going to come and get us. We're screwed. Yeah. But nobody showed up. And they said to me, do you want to get on our boat and go in with the bales or wait out here with Barry? I'm like, I'll go with you. So I don't care. Just get me out of here.
That was Barry's loop?
Yes.
I don't know if
he's not around anymore. Shut up, everybody who knows him.
Was that part of my brother's book?
I'm not sure. I was never told anything, but I think it might have been, yes.
Government, remember?
Yeah. I don't know. I know nothing. And I just want to quickly tell one other story about being scared about having a load on board, because I got boarded by the Coast Guard at 2 a.m. with a full load. And it was 3 of us on the boat. I was with 2 Cubans, and well, it's conch. I should say 2 conchs.
You're like roaches. We're everywhere.
Anyway, we were coming back from Mexico. Yes. And it's 2 a.m. It's my watch. I'm driving the boat, and I see everybody else is asleep. And I see, this is back in the day when they had a boatyard out on Stock Island that built the fake boats with the fake, you put your load. Yeah, I wasn't going to say the name, but yeah. So you put your load down below, and then you'd put your, what do you call it? The dryer sheets? To mask the smell. I don't know if that worked, but that's so anyway. And then we're in Mexico. We bought a load of fish and ice, and we poured that on top of the pot. Yeah. So that's how you would get them. So yeah, I mean, it's not. There's actually a separator between it. They're not throwing fish on the pot. So anyway, we were in Mexico for quite a while. Then also. Anyway, coming back 2 a.m. It's my watch, and I see something on the radar, and I'm like, so I changed course a little bit. They did too. So I woke up the captain and I said, hey, somebody's right behind us, and they seem to be tracking us. So he got up, and we had these stupid shirts he bought that were like golf shirts that had a fishing team name embroidered on it so that we could act like we were professional fishermen or something. So he's like, put your shirt on. This was on a fishing boat, though. So yeah, so I had to put your shirt on. I'm like, all right. So I changed. He's like, change course. We did that 2 or 3 times, and then all of a sudden we get the radio going, and all I hear is prepare to be boarded. And there's floodlights, and there's machine guns, and yeah. So
people really like that quote, and they made it. There was one movie where they used it, and.
Is it not real? Because I swear I heard it.
No, they really do say that over the radio. And that may be what only people remember hearing, but prepare to be boarded.
Oh, yeah.
You're a U.S. flag vessel on international waters, prepare to be boarded. Especially if you don't answer the radio.
Yeah.
Then we're just going to come over and say hi.
Yeah. So I might have forgotten to mention that back in the day when I first moved here in the 70s, I worked at a restaurant called the Hukilau, which a lot of people know me from. So this boat, they pull up. They 4 guys with machine guns, 2 on the bow, 2 on the stern. The captain comes on board. And he looks at me and goes, "Hey, don't you work at the Hukilau?" and I'm like, "Yeah, oh hi, nice to see you." So the captain said, another name, sorry. So the captain says to me, hey, he says to the guy, do you want some coffee? And he said, yes. And so he looks at me and says, Pete, make some coffee. And I'm over there like my hands were shaking so friggin' hard. If he would have looked at me once, he would have known. But anyway, we had a full load, and they had no dogs, thank God. But yeah. But they did search the boat. I don't think they made it. I know that sometimes they make holes and stuff. I don't think they did this time. I'm not quite positive. It's been a while. But But anyway, we were
was this?
boarded.
What year was this one?
This was my last trip. So
Give me a decade.
had to be like 80, 81.
Well, then I would have to go back and ask some older coasty people because I wasn't in that 80s. But no, that drilling holes and things like that sort of happened more in the 90s, we'll say.
Oh, baby. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, putting drugs underneath ice and fish is not unheard of. It makes us work for it. I have gone through a lot of snapper. A lot. And you can ask any coastie out there. They all have their most hated fishing vessel. And mine by far is swordfish.
I used to long line for swordfish also.
Oh, the worst smelling
I couldn't eat
fish
it
when
anymore.
they're-
I know.
Ugh. That I just get on and I'd be like, please don't throw up today. And then we'd be okay and keep going and not find anything, but have dug through 5 or 6 fish.
Yeah.
And
So,
but
yeah.
snapper's easier because it's a lot smaller.
Yeah, I would guess. I know. They're Department of Homeland Security. They still have the door. Yes, they still have the door. Yes, I worked there off and on for 18 years with Coffee Butler playing piano. It was the best job I ever had, I swear. And the animals, yes, at the bar. But that is funny. I thought about that earlier today, and thank you for mentioning it. But yes, I still have the what you call it, chalkboard at the front door. But yes, anyway. So anyway, yeah, that was the scariest time ever, being boarded by the Coast Guard with a loaded pot at 2 a.m. with a couple of conks, Cubans. And when we got back in, once again, they were like, going to drop me off somewhere. So we're still loaded. We're coming back into Key West. And what do? Somebody throws something overboard, like a bag of potato chips. I'm like, what the hell are you doing littering at sea when we've got a loaded pot on board? Right. So, yeah, I mean, just crazy shit. So anyway, that was interesting.
I wanna follow that up with something that Terry got involved with. But I wonder if I can shift over without not necessarily using the reason why, but if you can share a little bit of the story of the guy that was on the boat for 92 days and no country would take him. Can you share that with us?
Sure.
Yeah.
He loved this story the first day I talked to him. So the comment went something like this. I have a friend who is friends with Tony. And that friend said, oh, Bridget did law enforcement with the Coast Guard. She'd be a great person. He goes, I want female law enforcement officer. I said, okay. And then he started talking about the history of the Keys. And I was like, well, I just want to point out that we didn't get a lot of drug busts on the Keys as the Coast Guard. I mean, a little while ago, we got a couple more, but it's not our high priority. Migrants for 20 years has been our bread and butter. I mean, I was out 3 days, got 104 migrants. This was in 2012, probably. 104 migrants on a 110-foot boat. It was a lot. But it was a fun 3 days because I was only the XO at that point and my CO was gone. And he had given me this professional development time. So I got to have the boat by myself with the crew and it was amazing. And he just kept calling me, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm fine. We got this. But during that time, we also trade off migrants between vessels until we figure out what their disposition is. And we happened to have this one gentleman who, for whatever reason, powers that be, had been passed off. And I was told it was close to 92 days. I don't know because I had transferred in during that time. And because of that, I mean, he was regular. But we also had our regulars that, you know, I'm sure you knew someone who was on the Coast Guard boat that came up and boarded you. We had our regulars that we would board all the time. I was nicknamed the Terminator by a certain fishing company.
I tell you.
In the Keys, because every time their boats went out, I happened to find a violation. And it wasn't on purpose, but I didn't ever find drugs on their boat. But those are the things where I say, you know, in the Keys, when we went out on patrol, it wasn't always about drugs. Sometimes it was about all the things that matter, which is fisheries and migrants and important things, customs protections. But we definitely had the humane side of it with this gentleman that was on board, multiple Coast Guard cutters for multiple days, and he ended up asking to do like work because he was so bored, and he would like polish a bit, and he would be like, and the thing is we used to have very strict rules on everything and how we treated everyone, and I broke the rules and we gave him a Coke, and I broke the rules and we gave him fruit. There are people that my husband's going to be back there going, "You're the problem," and I'm like, "Yes, I was the problem. I'm the reason that things changed on like other boats." But the whole idea was, everyone is human. I think hearing these women's stories is awesome because, like I said, they were kind of smart. It's a pretty decent job, especially when you know what our odds are and what our success rate, which is low. But to hear how it was and how they would come back, sailing different ways, using the same routes that I sailed on many Coast Guard ships around Cuba, up and back to Mexico, over to Jamaica, the tongue of the ocean, which is probably one of the coolest places you can ever be on a boat in. Maybe not with that company, but other than that, it is pretty amazing. But those type of things, when you hear what these women did in a time where I wasn't involved in interdicting, so I didn't have to meet you that way, which is nice. Yeah, but it's neat to see that things stay the same, but we've progressed, and technically we have more capabilities now, right, Abe? But we're
Not committing to anything.
no, he's not. Yeah, but it's neat to hear what used to come in so much easier when we had less of a presence.
And let me ask you this: so after the 92 days, where did the guy go?
Back to his country.
Okay, well, we didn't know what it's okay, but at first the country didn't want him.
Well, it's not
sounds
that
like
the
Colombia.
country. No, it's not that the country didn't want him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of processes that go into. There's a lot of things we do. If you're interdicted for drugs, and this is one of the things you asked me about, if your country doesn't claim you, that takes a lot more. And then, but now there's been a lot of improvements in how they process people and interdiction versus migrants, smugglers, figuring out who the traffickers are. There's a lot out there, but he did eventually get released back to his country and didn't come to the U.S.
Thank you for that. That's very, very interesting that somebody would actually spend 90 some days on a cutter. Mm-hmm.
Several. He probably had more
Several
sea time than some people in the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And definitely had more time on more ships than a lot of people.
Yeah.
He might have been on more total ships than I.
Very cool. I would have never thought of that. I mean, it reminds you of that movie where the guy gets stuck at the airport and then he can't get out. Well, thank you so much, Bridget, for sharing that with you. I want to pass the microphone to Terry, and when we were talking about getting speakers for this, and getting them up there to tell their stories and stuff. And first of all, I want to say this, and I forgot to say it. Everybody that I've ever talked to that's been a smuggler still has a lot of respect for the Coast Guard and for DEA and people doing their job. It was never like a bitter resentment. It was you doing your job, and we're kind of doing our job or trying to make money. But any event, so Greek says, you know Terry Palmer. You tended bar with her at the Bull and Whistle. No, I don't remember Terry Palmer. He says, blonde, tall. I go, oh, the girl with the short shorts and the great legs. And she said, yes. And then tonight, well, was that a true story or not? No, I'm not. Okay, well, I'm sorry. She had great legs and a great ass, but she was not a blonde. Sorry about that. Anyways, we come in here tonight, and she tells me a story that she ran into somebody who said, you're the lady with the great legs, something to that effect, or did I make that up too? No. Go. Okay, let me do this.
Matt, tell them how long we've all known each other. Because Terry, me,
My
Greek,
God.
and you all were the
45, 50 years.
70s.
Yeah, for
70s.
sure.
And Carol also
Yeah,
came in the
yeah.
70s.
I actually attended bar not just with Terry, but with Greek, and it shows you what happened. Total pain in the ass. Thank you. Let me do this. So Terry, you told me some interesting stories about money and about a trip and stuff. And if you want to share some of that with us, thank
I
you.
guess that's why I'm here. So.
Boy, I'm getting my ass whipped tonight, aren't I? I tell you what, I deserve it. Go ahead.
I want to thank all of you for coming too. I'm actually the player to be named later because somebody else dropped out and my name came up. So here we are. And I truly did not copy Pete's trip, but there's a lot of similarity. When I first came to Key West with my then husband, we brought a sailboat down here for charter and we kept it at the pier house. Well, the sailboat and the husband went away. But I continued to spend as much time as possible on the water, sailing with really great people. Does anybody remember Groovy Gray? I did. I was fortunate to do some deliveries, not smuggling with him, but he was an amazing captain. So anyway, I was dating a man who said to me, well, I have this small sailboat and I want to go to Belize and pick up a load. Do you want to come? Sure. Yeah, when we're going. So it was he said it's a small sailboat, only 19 feet at the water line, 20 feet overall, 21 feet. So nobody's going to suspect us. And they're not going to mess with us. So he's building false compartments in the boat. And I'm going to flea markets, getting, paperback books to read. Because truth be told, and we talked about this, adventure can be really boring. There's a lot of time when you just start going, are we there yet? So we get everything organized. I mean, and it's a little boat, and then we're towing a little inflatable dinghy, and I've got a gimbal stove to cook on. And the first afternoon out, and now my memory isn't as good as hers. I'm older. And so you're just a kid. So I think the first afternoon we're out, the water came in over the floorboards, and it turned out that the fresh water had leaked. Fortunately, we brought gallons of fresh water on board. And then I said to him, so we took care of that. And I said, so where's my navigation equipment? Because I had enough hours to qualify as a captain, but I hadn't gotten my navigation quite down. He said, I forgot. But we have Loran. Oh, okay. And yeah, no, there wasn't. But Loran, you might as well.
That's
try
what the
to
Coast
use
Guard used to. And
wristwatch, I mean. So
you can't learn it.
Then it does. I know. It put us in the middle of the Yucatan Peninsula. We're off the coast of Cancun. So then it turned out that he had very bad eyesight and he'd lost his contacts. And so guess who had to see everything? Because his glasses were about this thick and they'd get all covered with salt water. So we were off the coast of Cuba for quite a while. And I remember being tied to the boat while I'm on watch and the water's coming over me. Because he can't do it in that weather because he's got to have his glasses on. Not only that, it turned out, I'm a girl. Girls don't know anything. And it very quickly devolved from there, our relationship. By the time we were off the coast of Cancun, early morning, no markers, he can't see anything. You know how the light is with that. We get down to Cozumel, and we're playing tourist couple. So we've got to be nice. We're playing nice. Tourist couple. We're on an adventure together. So we're going to check in through customs and be nice. So we pull it up to Cozumel, and we're going to anchor, and then he's going to row in and get customs. So this is where our stories merge. He goes up front, throws the anchor over, and doesn't tie it to a cleat.
You tell this. You tell this story almost better than I do.
Well, guess who got to dive it up because he couldn't see anything.
Did your captain happen to have a cut where alarm clock hit him in the head?
And I forgot to mention too the Yucatan Channel, which when you just said the Yucatan Peninsula, it's like I didn't realize that we were going to take a little sailboat through. I didn't know what the Yucatan Channel was. I mean, if you've been through it, you'll remember it forever.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
going the other way too.
Yes.
So we go on to Cozumel, and we spent several days there meeting our contact. That was our land contact. Pretending we're a tourist couple, we hook up with another tourist couple. I fell in love with a great pair of iguana skin cowboy boots.
Oh my God.
Anyway, then we check out of customs and we head down for Ambergris Cay, San Pedro. And I must tell you, this was before the Maya Riviera was developed, and it was stunningly beautiful. Stunning. And as I recall, we went in through the cut at Ambergris Cay during the day with me at the front of the boat going.
It's a sunny day. You might be able to.
Yeah,
It was morning when we were there early. So.
Yeah. Well, we got, like some of you other people know, you think you're going to be loaded in a day or two. No, you wait. You wait. It's an adventure. So you're going to wait. So you wait and you pretend to meet this couple again and you hang out. So finally one morning they said, okay, you're going to move the boat south down the beach and you're going to anchor off of here. A whole football field away from the land. Really? Okay. So we got down there, we waiting. And finally early one morning, an open skiff shows up full of bales. And they just full. And we're within sight of this closed resort. I mean, okay. So they're throwing them on the boat, just throwing them on the boat. And I'm thinking, where are we going to put all this stuff? They keep throwing these bales at us. And then we discovered that, remember, I'm a girl. I'm not allowed to tell him anything about how the boat works because he knows. The battery's dead. This is, so he leaves with the skiff that loaded us to go back and get the battery charged. And I'm left trying to put everything away. All right. Now the weather is bad. It's sunny, but the wind is blowing. Okay. Like a son of a bitch. And it's calm inside the reef, but outside, nobody has gone out that day. Not the locals. Nobody's gone out. We're going to go. No, we can't go. Not today. He insisted that we go. So, of course, we go. And I'm standing at the bow looking for the cut again with the waves breaking over the reef. And just as the cut hit, just as I saw it, we got sideswiped. And I can't remember the nautical term for it, but we almost went over. And I will not forget that I grabbed, I think it was the shroud, the last moment before we went over. And we went through the cut. So now we sail back north and we're going to check into Cozumel again because we've been saving filthy, dirty, fishy clothes and everything else to try to disguise the smell. And, but we had to throw 3 bales away because we could not hide them. And we had made a deal. I said, we got to hide everything. So we wrapped all that up and we threw them overboard and hoped somebody would find them. We got back to Cozumel. And again, we're going to check in through customs, be the tourist couple. They saw us going out. And he rowed the boat in that afternoon, rowed the dinghy in that afternoon and came back. And when customs came out that morning, when we went to motor into the dock to check through customs, we discovered that he hadn't brought the oars in from the dinghy and they'd washed away. Yeah. Needless to say, we haven't spoken civilly to each other or even spoken at all, except when it was necessary, for weeks. After the customs, and I remember the customs guys, he had them come down and sit inside, and he had this huge cigar that he's smoking and blowing in the face of the custom guys. I'm sitting up above stitching sails thinking, even if I run ashore, it's an island. They will find me. They will find me. All right, so we head north, and somehow we did not get in the main part of the Gulf Stream. But we got Loran, it knows where we're going. We headed up. We didn't know where we were. And we're becalmed, we're running out of oil for the engine when we finally found a shrimp boat and traded mescal for some oil, and they told us where we were. Off of Fort Myers. Now, for days, guys, I've been saying, oh, by the way, I'm so not speaking to him that I'm in the dinghy every day reading a book. And I'm going, universe, get me back. I swear to God, I'll never do this again. I promise I will never do this again. So then that evening we come back in over the into the dry Tortugas, and it's flats up on that side. So, go this way, go that way. We anchored, got really lucky, and we anchored in with a little group of regatta of sailboats all our size. Oh, how special. Until the Coast Guard came to the boat. Well, somebody, and it wasn't us, had their radio on the wrong channel, and they were trying to find who did it to get them to change it. So the next morning we left with the other boats, sailing back up to the Keys. And late that afternoon, we got up to the Middle Keys, and we're heading in the channel. And he ran the boat hard aground in sight of the overseas highway. Hi! Having a fine time here. So we waited for the tide to come up, and it did. And we got in. They started offloading. I stepped off the boat, called a taxi, and came into Key West and got really drunk. Then I got paid in product mostly. Well, you can't sell pot in Key West. So I bought a little Mazda pickup truck and loaded it in my truck and drove out around the country, giving it to my friends who paid me. And so I got a road trip.
Hey, and I just wanted to add one thing also about the smugglers who were out there not knowing what they're doing, because twice I had bales thrown at me from boats that thought I was somebody that they were supposed to throw it at. And we were going by the fort one night coming back, and once again 2 a.m. and some boat runs up and throws me a bale of pot, and I'm like, no, wrong boat.
Wrong boat.
No. We already got ours.
That's great story, Terry. Thanks so much for sharing it. I think it points out what I wanted to come out tonight is just how difficult these things were, and the fact that they did it. And so now I take a deep breath, and I will give you a very special person to me that I've known. My brother, rest in peace, and her and I been dear friends for a long time. She ever invites you to dinner at her house, do not eat for 3 days, because she'll cook for 17 days. I think that it might have been me who coined calling her La Bruja Blanca, which means the white witch. And I will leave you that part of it. But we did a lot of counseling before we unloaded the boats. So without further ado, Greek.
Good evening. I have to say, when Fat first asked me if I would talk at the Smugglers, the Women Pirate show, I said to him, Fat, I got to look up pirate. I don't think I qualify as a pirate. So sure enough, well, I didn't look it up. I asked Alexa, what's a pirate? The days of dictionaries are gone. And I was told that it was a female pirate was somebody who practiced violence and lived on the water and also on the shoreline. And I said, man, I'm not a female pirate. I get seasick. I get violently seasick. I could get seasick behind the bar bartending at the Half Shell Raw Bar with the diesel smell and the wind blowing the boats, and I'm looking at them and I have to go to the restroom because I have a stomach ache. So that part of it did not happen. Now, I started smoking marijuana when I was a young teenager in New York City, and I have a very detailed and subjective ethical system. I did not care after I smoked pot for a while that it was illegal in the city, in the state, in the country, because I felt it was a plant that had beneficial uses and it shouldn't be illegal. So as a consequence, I didn't consider it illegal. So no paranoia when I was growing up. And I didn't consider my friends, who were all a lot older than I, because I was an old soul. And I was also always told whenever I would go to a card reader, or I go to a carnival or gypsy, whatever, they would always tell me, you have the power. I didn't know I had the power. I was just me. But I could always take away people's headaches with my healing hands. I have about a 98% efficacy rate. I don't care if it's a hangover, headache, or a cluster, or migraines, or whatever. I've always been able to do that. And I thought everybody could do that, but not everybody can. So these people that were friends of mine that were, sold pot, whatever. I got instructed about all the different grades of hashish. Remember hashish? I do remember hashish. These people, to me, were not the renegades. They were not the illegals. They were the underground heroes in my world. So, yeah, I mean, admittedly, it's, my world. But when I came to Key West in 1972 and started bartending at Lou's Bar, which is what the Bull and Whistle was called before it was the Bull and Whistle, with Sweet Pete, with Terry, with Fat, who was a pain in the ass. Still. And I met, God rest his soul in heaven, where I hope he's making the angels laugh like hell, Chicky Yanez, Fat's brother. And we became very, very close friends instantly. Right after I almost threw him out of the bar for breaking up ashtrays, he had these hands like claws, and he kept on breaking them. And I was just new behind the bar because I had been the head of the package store when the gay owner finally decided I was going to be the token female behind the bar. And he put me behind the bar on Easter Sunday, got free pizzas, walked me around the bar, threw me behind at happy hour with no training. So it was going to be like sink or swim, which it was. So Chicky would come in after drinking and carrying on, and he would take these plastic ashtrays and he would just crunch them with his hands, and I watched him do this a couple of times, and he's going around the bar picking up the ashtrays and destroying them. So I go trotting right over and I said to him, hey, listen, you can't do that. Those ashtrays cost my boss $1 a piece. So he looks at me, he was all fucked up on doers now. He takes out a $100 bill, slaps it on the bar, and says, give me 100 of them. And that was it. We were friends for life. So I get a call one day, and he calls me up and, pre-cell phone. Greeky, I got to talk to you. You got to do me a favor. And I was like, all right, well, come on over. You and Patty come over. So he comes over and he says, listen, I want you to do me a favor. And I was like, what's the favor? And he said, I want you to go out and buy yourself a full slip. And then I want you to buy yourself a big tent dress. And I want to wrap packets of $100 bills around you and fly you in a private plane to Jamaica, where we're going to meet some Rastas. And will you do it? And I was like, well, G fat, G chickie, G fat, G chickie, I guess so. So I got the slip. They took the seal of meal $100 bills in little packets. They stoked me from my neck to above my knees, and I was like wrapped in duct tape, turning around in circles as they were. Please, the stupid shit we did, I can't even believe it. It's unbelievable. So I'm, walking like, some kind of weird, doll or something, cake walking. We get on the private plane. I think Chicken was on that trip with me. God bless her soul in heaven. Chicken. And Patty Doe and Chicky and I, we got to Jamaica. We stopped and had, what was that place that we all stopped at in the Bahamas? Peace and Plenty or something? Yeah. And had to gas up there and then went to Jamaica, went up to the Blue Mountains, I think. Beautiful. I think. Anyway. All right, so that was successful. We get back to Key West, no problem. Every time I would do anything for Chicky or for my girlfriend Morty, who was also a sailboat smuggler of marijuana, they'd always drop off some money. I never asked them, but there was, I don't know, between $2,000, $5,000, I don't know, I spread it around, fed the universe. And so we get back to Key West, and Chicky calls me up and he says, Greeky, I need a favor. I'm like, oh, Christ. What now? So he comes over and he says, all right, well, this is, when we want to bring the load in. What do you think? Now, I would always light a candle to Caridad, who is the Cuban patroness saint of the sea, whose name day is September 8th. I'm a Virgo. My birthday is September 4th. I would always have the candle burning. He said, all right, well, we're going to pick it up, the load about it this time, and we're going to bring it in. What do you think? I grabbed my lunar calendar and I said, absolutely not. And he was like, well, why not? We got the people in Jamaica. We got the things lined up. They got the money. And I said, you'd be bringing in the friggin' load on a full moon. You damn fool. That's not when you bring in a load. You bring a load in on a new moon. So you're going to have to postpone it 2 weeks. Needless to say, quite a few times, that happened successfully. Then I get another call. Now, every time he calls me up and says, Greeky, I have a favor to ask, I'm going to be in the shit. Something's going to happen. So he calls me up and he says, okay, Greeky, I got to come talk to you to the house. I'll be right over. All right. He walks in the house. He said, I need your guest bedroom. Now, me, stupidly, thinking that the entire Yanese clan is coming down, which by this time I'm friends with everybody, love everybody. It's a big family. I'm thinking they're going to come down to Key West and Fat doesn't have enough room, Chicky doesn't have enough room. I'm going to put them up in my house and feed them and take care of them. No. He wants to take my guest bedroom and fill it to the ceiling with marijuana bales that are wrapped in black garbage bags. I said, Chicky, for Christ's sake, I can't give you my guest bedroom. I have people coming to visit me. That's not going to happen. So he looks at me. I think that may be one of the very few times in my life I told him no. And he said, well, can you give me a closet? God's honest truth. I said, all right, well, a closet I can give you. So he sends over Electric Jerry, who takes Electric Jerry, God bless his soul, another one, who comes into my house, takes off the hollow core door of my closet, puts in a solid core door with a deadbolt, and I tell him, wait, you're going to fill this with pot? He said, oh yeah. I said, all right, bring on the bounce, which all of you may or may not know was the drug smugglers' product of choice to keep away the smell of the marijuana until the dogs got trained to smell bounce, right?
Yes.
Isn't that what happened?
True.
So he gets it in there, he puts it up, Needless to say, that happened a couple of times, and it was quite the experience. Now, I know we've gotten late, and I don't want to keep you. You want one more small story?
Yes, but before you do it, I just want to throw in a little chicky thing that made me laugh so hard. The time that we ran aground at Boca Grande on Sunday morning, we got back and they brought me in on the other boat. Anyway, like 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I'm like, where's my cash? And so I called Chicky up and I said, hey, I haven't been paid yet. It's been a while. And he goes, I'll be right over. I'm like, no, I'm at work. He goes, no problem. I'll be right over. I was bartending at the Hookilo and he brought a great big potato chip bag in.
Filled with $100 bills?
Yeah, and he gave it to me. He's like, here you go. Here's your lunch.
We can't make this shit up. We cannot make this shit up, right?
May I
Go
say
ahead.
one more thing about Lou's Bar? How many times, if you opened in the morning, did you have Sunday, Monday, Killer Mike, Monkey Tom, and
Monkey Tom.
Trucker Mike? I mean, come on. I never knew anybody's name.
And I once had a drink there with Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams.
Yeah,
they walked in when I was
came in and
They
Bill
walked in
Bobbin.
as I was getting off work, and I said, "Oh, can I have a drink with you?" Like, sure, sit down.
Sure, sweetie.
The waitress came over, and Truman said to her, "She's having a gin and tonic. It's the only sensible thing to drink in August in Key West."
Okay, so fast forward. When I first came to Key West with my best friend, Morty, I had just been given a credit card. And the first thing that I did with the credit card was go to First Federal Savings and Loan on Southern Street, take out a $500 cash advance, and buy a pound of Colombian gold marijuana that we proceeded to clean all the stems and the seeds out of. Not the business model you want to follow. Bag it up, bring it back up to New York, and kept half of it and sold half of it. And that was before my trip back to Key West. So remember the name Morty, because she's going to come up when I was bartending at the Full Moon Saloon.
And you wonder why I was intimidated by you back in the day?
I couldn't understand. How could anybody be intimidated?
Shit,
by
I
me?
was intimidated by her.
Yeah, I'm the only
Damn
motherfucker
right.
that did intimidate you too. Okay, so this friend of mine, Morty, was very successful at taking sailboats, full of pot, bringing them in, always drop off some money for me. She had a really crazy sister. I mean, this sister got paid by the government for being crazy. You got to be good and crazy to get paid by the government for being crazy. But she was like the kingpin. The sister was the kingpin. And she comes into the Full Moon Saloon and she tells me, Greeky, you gotta go and rescue Morty in the Azores. And I was like, what do you mean I gotta, listen, she's in trouble. They're having trouble with the crew and the boat is broken and, you gotta go and protect her. Now I'm thinking, how the fuck am I going to get a weapon to bring over to the Azores to protect my best friend? We meet at the airport. She pays for a round trip ticket to the Azores in cash. Gives me this yeah. Gives me this part. And meanwhile, I found out she wasn't taking pot to Europe. She was taking some guy who had a restaurant in the Bahamas, his profits from the smuggling, to bring it to Switzerland to put in, clean it or whatever the hell they call it. So I get to, meanwhile, I'm all stressed out. And the Azores, if you ever have a chance, Fayal is friggin' magnificent. I am convinced that's where Atlantis was. Beautiful place. And the Azorians are every bit as cuckoo burgers as our local conchs. I mean, the same kind of cuckoo. So I get there, I get to the dock, and I see Morty coming down with a big basket of clean laundry, skipping along. She's a sweetheart, a saint. She's a saintly woman. And I was like, babe, are you all right? What can I do? And I said, the crew member that you're having trouble with, and he said, his wife has had a baby early. He had to leave. That was the crisis. I said, well, don't worry. I got you the part that you needed. And she was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, guess what? Wrong part. Yeah, I mean, naturally it was the wrong part. But I got to spend, 4 beautiful days there. Now, after I left, they ended up sailing from the Azores to Portugal, rented 2 cars, packed the cars with money. It was a little damp, and they didn't have it in seal meal packets. So what do they do with the money? They put it on the engine block. They get through Portugal. They're on the road on the highway in Spain. Guess what happens? Fire! $100 bills jumping out of the car hood all over the highway. Luckily, they didn't get picked up by the federales. They got picked up by the highway patrol. So Morty had to go to jail, where she taught people English. That's how saintly she is. In the meantime, the guy that had the restaurant in the Bahamas hired an international lawyer who flew over there, got the fucking money back that wasn't all mildew and wasn't all mushando from the mildew of, and my friend got home. Okay. And that's the end of that story. So, although I was not a pirate, nor was I a smuggler, I was the white witch, La Bruja Blanca, that always tried to get those loads in. And I've got to say, at least 4 or 5 of my friends were smugglers.
And you were a great criminal.
I was a great criminal.
Yes.
So I wasn't a smuggler or a pirate, but I call myself smuggler adjacent.
You were, yes. Smuggler light.
Yes, very.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you, Greek.
sure.
That's a great story. We've been here a long time tonight, and I know I get told, if you do a show more than an hour and 10 minutes, people want to leave and shit. Our shows run 2 hours, nobody wants to leave. But we're gonna close it out real quick. I'm gonna tell you a real quick story about my brother. Brother had a house on Ashby and Flagler Street, and he leaves and goes to Costa Rica. So years later, a local cop buys the house. And he goes, "Hey, Fat," he goes, "your brother Chicky, right?" Yeah. He goes, he says, I can understand a safe in the bedroom, right, for, stashing shit. He says, but I went to renovate the deck. He says, and when I pulled up the deck, there was a bathtub-sized safe in there with nothing but, rubber bands and dust and rubber bands. So, yeah, there was a lot of money. Anyways, everybody, Bridget, Terry, Sweet Pete, Carol, Greek, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for coming and listening to us. And we know that, we can do more than an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you very, very much. We'll pull off something in the near future here. We got some ideas. But good night. I say thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Hey, before you go away, please, I just wanted to take a moment to say, can I get your attention for 30 seconds, please? Thank you. I just wanted to say that, speaking about how amazing women are, etc., everything that has happened in my life would not have happened without my partner, Becky. So. Help me stand.
Spend my days with a woman unkind, smoke my stuff and drink all my wine. Made up my mind, make a new start, going to California with